There you go. And seconded by Representative Allen. All right, let's see. There you go. All right, and so our minutes are approved. And so this morning, I am very excited. We've got Dr. Walden with us this morning. He has spoken to our group in the past. Richie, 2 years ago? I think it was 2 years ago. And Dr. Walden, as long as you can keep working, I'm going to keep trying to keep you coming to see us. So we appreciate all that you do and the historical knowledge that comes with it. So I'm going to read his bio real quick. I want to see if somebody can hear me. Okay, make sure it's better. There we go. Dr. Walden is a William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor at North Carolina State University and President of the Walden Economic Consulting LLC. During his 43 years on the faculty at NC State, Walden became recognized as an expert on the state economy and public policy. He is the author of 12 books. Robert, you can put those books on your shelf. He's got 12 more to add there. 12 books on and 300 articles and reports, and he has made 3,000 personal experiences. Walden is a frequent contributor to the national and state media and continues to write bi-weekly newspaper columns. He has won numerous awards, including 2 Champion Tuck Awards for Excellence in Broadcasting, the UNC Board of Governors Award for Excellence in Public Service, the Holiday Medal for Excellence from North Carolina State University, and the Order of the Longleaf Pine. His newest books are Real Solutions and, all right, Michael, you're going to help with this one. Disunia, yep, a political thriller. And he resides in Raleigh with his wife, Mary. So, Dr. Walden, it's great to have you here, and you take as much time as you want. And at the end, we'll save a few minutes for everybody to ask questions with us, all right?
That's fine. Well, here's the challenge. Let me do the share screen thing. Share screen's been disabled. So someone needs to enable the share screen function.
Yeah, Coy does.
Go ahead.
You can do it now.
Okay. There we go.
Thanks, Coy.
Okay. Everyone see it? Everyone see? Okay, very good. Well, thank you for inviting me again. These are some of the most favorite things I do, speak to groups all around the state. I've been lucky in my job to speak to groups in every county of North Carolina. In fact, maybe I'm making my second swing through all the counties. I actually am retired now, so there should have been an emeritus there, but I'm still continuing to work with groups and do some consulting, do some writing, et cetera. So what I want to do this morning is obviously talk about the big issue, at least in terms of the economy, is where are we in the recovery from the pandemic-induced recession? Where are we going? And then thirdly, what sort of long-run impacts this pandemic will have on the economy? Economists think it will have major impacts on our economy. First of all, some bullet points on where we are. It looks like we're making progress on things like cases, hospitalizations, and deaths due to the rise in vaccinations. Restrictions are obviously easing. Job and economic activity are both trending upward. Federal government has pumped a lot of money into the economy. We'll talk about that. And I think there are hopes that we're going to get back to some sense of normalcy by the fall. Of course, we do have to worry about the variants. Worst case scenario would be that we have the economy open, and that unfortunately leaves the door open for variants, and the vaccinations that we've gotten don't handle those, and we have another surge. I mean, I think that's probably a low probability of that, but I'm not a medical person. And so that, at least, I think is our biggest concern, those variants, and whether we really have licked this virus or whether it's going to come back to us in some other form. So my personal opinion is we still need to be vigilant, even those of us, and I'm one of them who totally vaccinated. I think we still need to be careful. The pandemic did induce a recession. This recession was unlike any recession, at least that I've lived through, and I think this is my 8th recession as a professional economist, and a few more since I've been alive. And most recessions develop due to some imbalance in the financial system. We had the recession for example, in the 90s, that was due to the S&L changes in rules for savings and loans, and that impacted them in a negative way. We had The tech sector induced recession of the early 2000s due to overexuberance in tech investments. We had, of course, the financial recession of the mid 2000s, 2007 to 2009, due to imbalances in the housing market. This was very different in that it was really I call it a mandated recession, because early on, our healthcare people told our political decision makers that we needed to restrict human contact in order to get a handle on the spreading numbers of infected people. The big worry was that we would have a situation where our healthcare system would be overwhelmed. And so the decision was made, mostly at state levels, because these were state decisions, to really curtail economic activity. The hope was it would be for a short period of time. And so, as you know, here in North Carolina, we had the stay-at-home order, not go out to work unless emergency or unless you were in those essential services. We had some sectors of the economy that were told to just totally close down. Leisure hospitality would be an example. And economists knew, and I think public decision makers also knew, that when we did these things, there would be a negative consequence in the economy. So a year ago, we were just beginning to get the data for April, which was the worst month of the COVID-19 recession, April 2020. We lost in 2020 nationally 20 million jobs, 20 million jobs lost. Here in North Carolina, we lost about 600,000 jobs. And that really set the stage for the rest of the year. Although we began to claw back in the third quarter, we're still not totally back in terms of any of those numbers. In fact, if you look at this chart, you can see that 20 million loss at the national level on the left-hand side, the left-hand chart. You can see, however, that we have had job gains, except for a couple of exceptions each month. April was a little disappointing, and I'll talk about that in a moment. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see again, North Carolina, we lost 600,000 jobs of April 2020. We've also clawed back. We don't yet have April numbers for North Carolina. If you look at the unemployment rate in the state and the nation, states in red, nations in turquoise, again, gigantic rise in unemployment in April. About over 14% at the national level. We were a little better here in North Carolina, about 13%. And then we have had a reduction in the unemployment rate since then, a little bit of uptick again in the April report at the national level. And once again, we'll get the state report in a couple of weeks. Now, this has been a recession, and when I pause, I'm taking a sip of coffee. This has been a recession, however, that has not affected everyone and every economic sector in the same way. If you look at this chart, and this chart is for North Carolina, I have three columns. One column on the left is the sector. Middle column is April 2020, and what I'm showing you there is the percentage of jobs that we had in the sector in April 2020 as a percent of the jobs that we had pre-pandemic in that sector. And pre-pandemic is defined as February 2020. And then March of 2021, I have the same thing. And again, we don't have April yet. And if you look at April of 2020, you can see every sector was adversely impacted. Overall, we were down about 12% in our total jobs. You can go down the line there, you see construction was under by 5%, retail trade by 12%, et cetera. But look at the two sectors I have highlighted in red, leisure hospitality. 45% of the jobs in leisure hospitality but were lost between February and April. And in other services, and a lot of these would be personal services, barber, nail salons, gyms, et cetera, down 26%. So these were the two sectors that were enormously impacted. Now, fast forward to March of 2021, the latest data you have, the good news is we are only down 3% at the aggregate state level. And as you look down there, you can see several sectors are almost back, if not totally back. Construction only down 1%, manufacturing 3%, retail trade, information, and financial services all back to 100%. In fact, professional services, actually more jobs there. than there were in February of 2020. However, leisure, hospitality, and other services are still down, but obviously down not as much. The other impact of these differences is if you think about the average pay of folks in these various sectors, leisure, hospitality, and other services actually have the lowest average rates of pay. So not only were those sectors impacted in terms of losing jobs, for people who work there, these tended to be folks who are at the lower end of the economic ladder, lower end of the income ladder. A lot of that is due to the fact that many of these jobs are entry-level jobs. People are maybe working part-time. I did that, several different kinds of jobs in leisure hospitality. But there are many people who that's their career. And so this has exacerbated, of course, our issue that we have in the nation with income inequality. Now, I do want to address one of the issues of the day that's gotten a lot of attention, and that is that if you look at the April job report for the nation, we had a gain in jobs, about 300,000 net new jobs, which was good. But forecasters, economists who try to forecast these things were expecting 1 million jobs. Now, you can argue, well, it doesn't matter. So the forecasters were too optimistic. 300,000 is not a bad number. And it's actually not a bad number if you go back and look at that slide that compares the kinds of job gains we've been getting. But nevertheless, this has brought up an issue about whether, or an issue about why, and you hear this anecdotally, although you also see in the data, a lot of businesses are saying they can't find people to take jobs. And so this has raised a debate at the national level. We've had debates here in North Carolina about why is that? Why are we seeing a lot of jobs not being filled? And I think there are several answers here. I don't think it's a question of this is the answer or that is the answer. I really think it's all the issues. Certainly, one is that many people who are unemployed and still unemployed are not really ready to go out and look for work. They're still fearful of COVID. In fact, there's still COVID cases being revealed every day. So that's one potential reason. Second reason is that there may be parents who, again, are unemployed and would like to work, but their children are home. They're not in school, they're home. And they have to be home to manage those children, take care of them. So that would be another valid reason. A third reason would be that many people who maybe were in some of these jobs where there's a lot of, where there are few applicants, maybe they found other work in the last year. And then a fourth reason could be that the skill sets are not matching the skills, and I'm going to talk more about this later. The skills of jobs that are open are different. The skill needs of the jobs that are open are different than the skills that people who are unemployed have. Now, the biggest disagreement has come over what has the federal supplements to unemployment compensation done. And just a little history on this: every state runs its own unemployment compensation system. And they vary in terms of their generosity. North Carolina actually is among the more frugal of states. And when the first stimulus package was passed, which was in late March of 2020, the decision was made at the federal level to provide some additional help to those unemployed through the federal government augmenting or supplementing state level unemployment compensation payments. And in that first bill, the supplement was $600 a week, very generous. And then the notion was that people need a lifeline. We didn't know how long this pandemic was going to last, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we had an update of that, I think, in the fall, and the amount was reduced from 600, I believe, to 400. And then the last version of this that was passed this year, the supplement's still there, but it's now been reduced to 300. So the question that some people have raised is, are people who are getting the unemployment compensation plus the federal supplement, and if these are folks who are working in low-paying jobs anyway, could they be in a situation where it's actually better financially for them to remain unemployed rather than go back to work? Now, there's actually a requirement to get unemployment compensation in most states that you look for work, but sometimes that's hard to enforce. And the answer, at least based on the most recent research, there's been, as you might expect, a lot of economists who have been scurrying around to try to look at whether that question can be answered using current data for the current pandemic. There have been studies in the past that have looked at this question during other times. The current research is that, yes, this could be an impact. And in fact, the research that was just published in March out of the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is not a federal group, it's a private think tank that's been around a century. It's probably the most prestigious economic think tank in the country. Those researchers found that for every 10% increase in federal unemployment compensation supplements, the number of applicants go down by 3%. So I think this is a factor. I don't think it's the only factor. And I don't begrudge anyone, this is just my personal opinion, who looks at the numbers and says, well, hey, I'm better off staying unemployed for a while because I'm getting more money. That would be a decision I would make too. Now, the federal supplements are scheduled to run out in September. So unless they are revived, this will be a short run issue. And I do think we're probably going to have more people looking for work as the months go on, as long as we stay on this positive track of more vaccinations, decline in cases, decline in death rates, et cetera. If we have a flare up with the variants, then of course all bets are off. So the answer, I think, to why we apparently have fewer people looking for work than we would expect, I think the answer is all the above. All the things that I mentioned appear to be a factor based on the research that we have. All right, let me turn to what the federal government has done. Another sip of coffee. Federal government has been very, very active, actually more active in dealing with the COVID-19 recession than any recession we've ever had, even more active in terms of what was done during the 1930s, the Great Depression. And I think the reason is we knew this was going to be a problem. When you tell businesses to shut down, when you tell people not to go out of their homes, not go to work, that's going to be a problem in the economy. So early on, a year ago, late March of 2020, we had the first stimulus plan, $2 trillion. Since then, we've had 2 or 3 others. We're up to now about $6 trillion of federal money being allocated to help ease the pain, if you will, of the COVID-19 recession. This has gone to various kinds of programs. It's also gone to people in terms of, again, the unemployment compensation supplements, the stimulus checks to families, et cetera. So it's been dispersed in a lot of different ways. This money's all been borrowed. So people who are concerned about the debt has gone up, and I'll say more about that in a moment. All told, and all this $6 trillion has not been totally spent, especially the last $1.9 trillion. It'll be over a couple of years more. But all told, North Carolina is due to have received about $48 billion of this $6 trillion. Now, in terms of the debt, yes, it's gone up. Yes, this means we are borrowing from the future. Yes, this means that our interest payments on the debt will be greater. The good news is interest rates being very, very low. If you look at our debt interest payments on the national debt as percent of the economy, it's actually lower today than it was in the 1980s and 1990s. And the other thing that I'll mention is, what was the alternative? And I think the alternative would have been, if the federal government had done nothing, there would have been massive suffering, households, massive rates of bankruptcy among businesses. We would have had a significant part of our economy simply go away, and it wouldn't have been there to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. So we can argue about whether the $6 trillion was too much, too little, how the $6 trillion was dispersed. But my opinion, this is my opinion, is this was warranted by the federal government to try to do something to backstop the economy while this pandemic was going on and while the recession was going on. Now, there are some long-term worries. Some people worry that, or some economists worry that the stock market, which until the last couple of days has been on a roll, may be overvalued. And the reason for this, if you look at the data that we have from the first round of stimulus checks, these would have been the checks that were issued or beginning in a year ago. People didn't spend all that money. In fact, they spent about 2/3 of it. About a third was invested. Now, we don't know exactly where the investments went, but my guess is, the guess of many economists, that a lot of that money went into the stock market, which obviously, whenever you have an infusion of money in the stock market, it tends to push values up. And so there's one concern that maybe the market's overvalued. When the federal stimulus tapers off, will we have a correction? Another concern, which we're increasingly hearing about, is the potential for higher inflation and higher interest rates. Now, this is the concern here is rather interesting. It's based on the fact that the federal government has pushed a lot of money into the economy, the $6 trillion. At the same time, the economy is recovering on its own. And so the concern here is, will we move from an underperforming economy to an overheated economy? By overheated, I mean that people and businesses will be trying to spend money, but they'll be trying to spend money on products and services where we've not recovered the production of those products and services. That is, there will be shortages. And when you have a shortage, you have prices going up. So this, and economists are divided on this, but we did have a rather ominous inflation report that was just released for April. Inflation on an annualized basis was up to 4%, which is more than double that what has been running. So that's something to watch. And then internationally, if we do have higher inflation and we have higher interest rates, and incidentally, the higher interest rates would go along with higher inflation, then would that lower the dollar, and would that cause some problems in terms of our international trade position? The last point I have on there, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, is that, and this is probably more of an interest to an economist than to the general public, but we're really testing a new economic theory. And you might say, well, hasn't economics been around for 150 years? You guys and gals have new theories. Well, yeah, sometimes people do come up with new theories. You've all heard of the notion of supply side economics, which says that the key to improving the economy is to reduce regulatory burdens, reduce tax rates. That'll stimulate business investment and innovation. That'll create jobs, and that'll propel the economy. So the theory there is you got to work on the supply side, make sure that the economy is one that attracts and supports private sector investments. There's another another competing theory. It goes right now under the name of modern monetary theory, but it's really an idea based on what I would call demand side economics, which says that the way you get the economy to grow in the future is to make sure you have productive work, and that you support those workers in terms of making sure they get educated and they get the best skills. You give them a social safety net in case they lose their jobs or they have other issues in the family. And I think the Biden administration, if you look at the programs they have already had passed and the programs they are now trying to get passed and will try to get passed in the future, they really fall into that category. In fact, this has all been debated with the notion of what really is infrastructure. And the traditionalists say, well, infrastructure is those hard things, roads, bridges, maybe even broadband. Followers of modern monetary theory say, no, there's human infrastructure, skill investment, educational training, et cetera, et cetera. So we're actually going to see a test of this theory if the Biden program is passed en masse, which of course is another question. So that's probably more of an interest to an academic economist, just to see how these competing theories work out. I do want to say something about the housing market, because the housing market has really moved in a contrary direction to what we normally see in a recession. During a typical recession, what you see, of course, is that people have lost their jobs. Interest rates oftentimes actually go up initially in a recession. And so people can't go out and buy homes, and you see a drop off in home buying, which means you see a softening of home prices. And of course, if you look at this slide, which is showing you the track record of average home price. Incidentally, this index is adjusted for characteristics of homes. So think of following the same house, same number of bedrooms, et cetera, over time. And when you look in the middle of the slide there, you can see the big drop in home prices during the so-called Great Recession of 2007, 2009. The interesting thing here, however, if you look at the right-hand side, which is our current period, home prices have continued to go up. And home buying is very, very strong. And you might say, well, why? And I think a couple of reasons there. Number one, many people have been working at home. They may be looking at their home and saying it's inadequate. If we're going to work here forever, we got to get a bigger house. People have gotten the stimulus checks, and as I said, not about 2/3 of that was spent. A lot of it's been invested, and some of that perhaps has been used to buy durable goods like cars and appliances and maybe even homes. And then lastly, interest rates, although they've ticked up a little bit, they've been very, very low. So you have probably seen in Franklin County the same phenomenon, that we've seen an uptick in housing prices. Part of this is also due, and I'll show you this slide, this will shock you. Lumber, of course, is a big, big component of any construction. And look on the right-hand side of this graph, the spike in lumber prices. And that's partially due to, again, builders trying to build more, or people who are adding on to their houses or remodeling, trying to do that. It's also due to some problems with sawmills. There was a big drop off in the number of sawmills during the Great Recession. We've not seen that full recovery. And then lastly, there's been a beetle infestation in Canada that's affected the lumber supply. In fact, I had to do a little fence repair a couple of weeks ago in my house. We have a fence going around the back of our house to contain our animals. And I went over to, I think, Home Depot and just bought a few 2x6s. And I was looking at the edge of one of them when I was checking out. It said "Made in Sweden." So we're actually getting lumber from Sweden. So, but this is an issue, and it is an anomaly in some sense, due to the fact that we typically don't see this during a recession. All right, a year ago, we were very worried about the impact of the COVID-19 recession on public budgets, state budgets, local budgets. In fact, I live across the street from the Vice Chancellor for Finance at NC State, and he and I would have discussions, and his forecast at that time was, well, NC State's budget's probably going to be cut by somewhere between 5 and 10%. And of course, all kinds of concerns about what that would do. I had younger colleagues of mine contact me, even though most of us were working from home, saying, "Walden, you've been here for 40 almost over 4 decades. Does that mean that faculty can be laid off?" And I wrote back and said, "Well, only if the General Assembly says they can be." And that probably were not words they wanted to hear. Right now, though, you don't hear much concern about that. And there are 2 reasons here. Even before bullet point 1 there, the $350 billion in new stimulus money, even before that was done, public budgets did much, much better than many forecasters expected. And I think the reason for that was the massive infusion of money from the federal government into the economy, the $6 trillion. That obviously put money in people's pockets to spend. So there you have more sales tax revenue that made jobs, some jobs benefited from that. So there's income tax revenue. And even before this last stimulus bill, North Carolina's public budget was looking, the general fund was looking better this year than it was last year. I think it was actually for the last forecast I saw was for general fund revenues for North Carolina to be up at double-digit rates compared to last year. Then on top of that, the last stimulus bill that the Biden administration got through, the $1.9 trillion, has for the first time a component of money going directly to state and local budgets. Now you might say, Walden, didn't you say that North Carolina got $48 billion from the various stimulus plans? Yes, but that money was targeted. A lot of that went to individuals. A lot of that went to COVID projects. A lot of it went to businesses. And even if it did go into state coffers, the states were told how to spend it. This $350 billion has many fewer strings attached. So, and it's estimated that $9 billion of that will go to North Carolina, as well as to North Carolina's counties and municipalities. So that's good news if you're involved in public budgets. All right, let me move on to the second part of my presentation. And that is trying to look ahead to where we're going in the economy. This is my leading index for North Carolina. The way to read this, if the lines are going up, it's good. It's signaling that we're going to have better growth in the future, economic growth. If they're going down, it's bad. And you can see on the far right-hand side, we had a big dip about a year ago, signaling that we were going into problems with the economy. But on the farthest right-hand side, not consistently, but you can see on trend, the measure's gone up. So this is signaling better times for the North Carolina economy ahead. This is my forecast for the largest metric, the most comprehensive metric that we have at any state level, gross domestic product. The way to read that is the value of aggregate production. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see North Carolina has dipped tremendously from the first to the second quarter. That was the brunt of the COVID-19 recession, but we've had a recovery since then. And I'm looking for our aggregate production in the state, and we produce, we're north of $500 billion of production in North Carolina annually, that we're going to reach the level we had pre-COVID in the next few months. So it looks like GDP will be fully back very soon. This is the track of unemployment, the unemployment rate. Again, big drop, big increase in about a year ago, improvement since then. Although, if you look at my forecast for 2023, which is, I think, 5.4%, that is significantly higher than the 3.8% we had pre-COVID. And that to me is indicative that we're going to have some disruptions, if you will, in the labor market. And in fact, that's a good lead into the conclusion of my presentation, which is to talk about long-run impacts. I think one of the most challenging long-run impacts of COVID is going to be on the labor market. We were already seeing the labor market change dramatically this century, primarily due to the advances in technology. You might say, well, what's that have to do with labor? Well, technology is getting so adept at doing things that people do that in some cases you're seeing technology and machinery introduced into businesses, and the business therefore doesn't need as many people, or the kind of people they need people who are more used to working with technology than maybe doing things with their brawn. So we already had something that economists label as technological unemployment going on. And that's been affecting every state, but certainly North Carolina. What we think, and we as economists, is that the pandemic is probably going to accelerate that. And because businesses are now going to look at workers, and most businesses love their workers, they know how important their workers are to them, but a business person, a business manager or owner can't help, I think, but looking at workers now and saying, gosh, I see a potential problem with those workers if we have another virus, if we have another pandemic. Workers get sick, and especially as we've seen with COVID-19, if one or two workers get sick, then all the workers can be at risk. So the bottom line here is that I think that we're going to see in coming years more businesses look for ways to economize on labor as they introduce more technology. Good example of this, I think one of the best examples I can think of, is food processing plants. North Carolina, of course, as many of you know, has a very, very significant food processing industry. It's tied to our agricultural production of meat, especially hogs and chickens. In Bladen County in Tar Heel, North Carolina, which is in Bladen County, we have the largest meat processing plant in the world. Probably many of you have been driven by that. Food processing was designated by the president as a essential service. So when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, those plants still operated. A lot of that work is done at close quarters. You can visualize people almost working on an assembly line as the meat comes by, and various techniques are imposed on it. So we had outbreaks of COVID in meat processing plants around the country, including here in North Carolina. But I think some plants may have been shut down for a period of time, but the industry still stayed afloat. I remember having an interview with a reporter from a national newspaper, it's probably a year ago, and they were interested in North Carolina, and we were talking about this issue. And I said, I think one result of this for North Carolina that we need to be worried about is that I expect that in the future, food processing plants will probably try to go the route of using more technology and fewer people, like bringing in robots to replace people on this assembly line. And I said, that's not going to be tomorrow, the next month, but it's probably something we need to worry about in terms of employment and what happens to those folks who become unemployed. No sooner than the words were out of my mouth than I read in some national publication about a food processing plant in the Midwest actually doing this. So this is an example, I think, of something that we could look ahead to happening. That is, in various industries, we're going to see more technology, more robots, more other things, more machinery replaced for people, especially in jobs where it's a routine job, where you're doing the same thing over and over and over, where there aren't a lot of decision-making needs required. Although I should say artificial intelligence, which is a short term for, or a term for saying machines use data to make cognitive decisions just like people do. That's going to be the prime focus, for example, the Apple investment that's coming to the Triangle. So we may, a lot of us may be put out of work even by machines that can make decisions. So anyway, I think this is a big deal. Some economists have estimated as many of 25% of the workers, 25% of the occupations we have today won't be around in a decade or two in the future. So I think this is something, when people ask me, Walden, what's the most important challenge post-pandemic for North Carolina? I say this is it, that we have to watch our labor market, watch how businesses do their task, watch where there is a shift in how tasks are done, try to track people who become unemployed as a result, and then help them reskill themselves, and hopefully reskill themselves in a very rapid way. Teleworking, I think, is another big takeaway from the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, it's estimated about 8% of the workforce teleworked, and what that means is they work from home at least one day a week. At the height of the pandemic, it's estimated that 40% of the workforce was working from home. I was one of those people. Chancellor Woodson told us, stay away, do your classes from home, do your research from home. Fortunately, North Carolina State, as well as many universities and colleges, we've been doing remote education for a long time, so that was not something new. So 40% of people were working from home peak pandemic. That's dropped. Estimates now it's somewhere between 20 and 30%, but the people who really watch this expect that it's probably going to remain above 20% for the immediate future. So more than double what it was. And that has all kind of implications, not only for businesses, how businesses are run. If you read the literature on this, and I've read a lot, you can see pluses and minuses. There are a lot of families who love this because they have more time at home. They don't have to commute. They may be able to live in a less expensive area because they don't need to be close to their job. They can interact with their children more, et cetera. On the other hand, you'll have workers say, I like a divide between my work life and my home life. I don't like having work at home. You hear the same pluses and minuses from the business side. Some businesses love it because it means less money to spend on office building, office space, and all the things that go with that. You have other businesses who worry about the ability of workers to collaborate, unscripted collaborations. And so we'll see how this works out, but I do think teleworking is probably going to be a bigger part of our economic future. And I was talking about teleworking and how that could free up people to live in less expensive areas. What I mean is that if you look at the 21st century, especially, and you in Franklin County know this very well, 21st century has really been the century so far of big areas, of the big metropolitan areas. That's where a lot of the new industries have located, technology, pharmaceuticals, et cetera. That's where the big universities are that are churning out people who work in those industries. People want to be close to their job. They want to try to avoid long commutes. So they want to live in those metropolitan areas, which drives up land prices, drives up housing prices, et cetera. If you're remotely working, you don't have to be in that expensive metropolitan area. You still may want to, but you don't have to. You can live anywhere, as long as you have high-speed internet, of course. And so I think as we see high-speed internet come to more areas, and I think it will. In fact, I just saw this morning, there's a bill introduced in the General Assembly to, I think, spend, several, I can't remember the number, but a lot of money on expanding high-speed internet into our rural areas. If we get that done, think about a family who says, you know what, I don't want to spend $500,000 on a home, or maybe $750,000 on a home. I want to spend half that in a nice small town or a rural area. And if they can still work from home and maybe even access other things through home delivery, et cetera, that may be the lifestyle that a lot of people may choose. So that's something I think something to watch. And on this matter of high-speed internet, I'll just throw this out for your information. Of course, the way that we have received high-speed internet, we being people who have it now, is mainly through cables, either buried underground or strung across telephone poles, et cetera. One reason why rural areas haven't gotten as much high-speed internet is because the nature of being rural is you have lower density. So if a company strings high-speed internet cables down a road, they're going to have many fewer people to connect than you do in a crowded city. So the economics don't work out as much. Well, there is an alternative to the traditional way of delivering high-speed internet that is actually being investigated by some very, very significant people. And it is to deliver high-speed internet from the sky through satellites. Now you might say, well, Roland, this has been, I've got dish satellite, I know what that is. Yes, but those satellites are way up. They're like 25,000 miles in the sky. These satellites will be what are called low Earth orbiting satellites, about 500 miles from the Earth. So the reception is much better, the connectivity is much better, et cetera. And none other than Elon Musk has a company, SpaceLink, that is his goal is to ring the Earth with these low Earth orbiting satellites and be able to deliver to anyone wherever they are in the Earth, face of the Earth, high-speed internet. And he's in the prototype stage. He's got the ability to launch these satellites through his SpaceX program, which of course the federal government now uses. So this is something for us to watch and see if it comes to fruition. Musk says that he's going to have a trial use of these high-speed internets in a limited area by the end of the year. So we will see. So let me conclude by saying, what does all this mean for North Carolina? How is North Carolina coming out of the pandemic? What are we looking at compared to other states? I certainly don't want to imply that I want us to benefit from others' costs, but I think the reality is that North Carolina has actually come out of this pandemic economically better in terms of our economic image than other states. Now, why do I say that? Well, one reason I say that is if you look at the two metrics that people like me and others follow in terms of trying to gauge the severity of the pandemic, the two metrics that people look at are job loss per capita, how many jobs did a state lose per state population, and COVID deaths per capita, how many people died of COVID per population of the state. If you look at those two metrics and you look at them for every state in the country, 50 plus DC, 51, where do you want to be in comparing and looking at those? Well, you hope you're a state where you're low on both of them. You don't want to be a state that's high on both of them, and you'd rather not be a state that's high on one and low on the other. You'd rather be low on both of them. And guess where North Carolina has been? Low on both of them. In fact, we've been the lowest state. We've been low on both those metrics among all the states in the Southeast. The home state of my wife, New York, has been at the other end, high on both of them. And what do you see in New York? You see that New York's losing population. People are relocating. Now, I don't know how far that'll go, but I think there could be a case to be made that we're going to have some geographic resorting in the future, and people and businesses that are in states where COVID has been very, very bad, where the job loss has been very, very bad, will think about picking up and moving. And I think North Carolina is a state they certainly will consider. In fact, we have a track record going back at least a decade, if not longer, of being one of the top states in what's called net in-migration. That simply measures the number of people moving to a state from another state minus the number of people who are moving out of your state. We've always been on the positive side of that for at least a decade, if not more. And I think this may very well accelerate as a result of the pandemic. So it's not necessarily surprising to me that we've been getting a string of announcements, Apple just being the most recent, well, actually Fidelity, I guess, yesterday in Durham being the most recent, with Apple, et cetera, coming to North Carolina. Now, I think that probably in terms of metropolitan areas, you're going to see more growth in the suburban areas rather than in the core. And for a county like Franklin, and I think I'd have to look, and I apologize for not doing this, if you're technically part of the Raleigh-Cary metro area. If you're not, you're certainly a very, very close. I think the question you're having is, of course, is it going to be a matter of business as usual, where the big companies and the big job announcements go to the metro areas, like has been in the past, and the more rural areas and rural counties lose out? And I could see that changing. I mean, we're already seeing a big change in the county to the south, directly south here, Johnston County. And I could see Franklin County and Vance County and Person County, which are all within easy driving distance of the triangle, the core of the triangle, certainly being able to piggyback on this. And then especially if, and I can't give you the numbers on high-speed internet coverage in your county, but especially if we get high-speed internet coverage near universal in the state. So I think North Carolina's come out of it. I think North Carolina has dealt with this pandemic. I mean, just look at the data. We've dealt with it probably as good as any state. And I think we're going to come out of this pandemic with our economic image probably enhanced, which I think means for the long run, more economic investment in the state. So with that, let me close, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Let's see. I don't think we can get the chat on. So if anybody wants to ask questions, just go one at a time, and we'll save about 10 minutes for questions.
Hey, Matthew, this is Blaine Holmes. I do have a question. Dr. Walden, when we're talking about inflation, do we calculate or track inflation the same now as we have in the past, or has that model changed?
No, that model is the same. And maybe what you're thinking about there, you will typically see two measures of inflation reported. One is the overall inflation, where all products and all services that you and I as consumers and everyone on the panel buy. And it's a weighted average where they look at prices and weight based on the importance in a household's budget, and then come out with an aggregate price change. And then you see another one called the that takes that measure but subtracts or doesn't include prices for food and fuel. And typically that comes in, or can come in lower. And the reason that that's done, or the reason the economists like to look at that, I should say, is that food and fuel are two of the items where there can be big shifts. I mean, 1 month way up, the other month way down. Of course, we're seeing that right now. We're seeing a spike in fuel prices. We will see a spike in fuel prices for May, and once the pipeline gets back on next month, we'll probably see fuel prices go down. But in terms of what I track, and most economists track, we track both, but there's no tendency here to emphasize one that's the best. And I will say also that when you look at things where the government takes inflation and uses it in some calculations, for example, Social Security benefits, which I'm now receiving, go up each year based on the inflation rate. That's the entire inflation rate, not the one that excludes food and fuel. And also there's an adjustment made every year in the tax brackets to prevent people from moving to a higher tax bracket just because of inflation. The overall inflation rate is also used for that. So no, there's not been any major adjustment in the way inflation is measured.
All right. Andy, I saw your hand go up earlier.
Yeah, Dr. Walden, I had questions, and mainly it surrounds income inequality. I'm wondering what you're hearing about, steps to address that, the growing disproportionate creation of high wage jobs compared to the struggle to find workers for the lower end. What are you hearing in your circles about whether or not this is becoming more of a focus point for trying to secure local-based economies and statewide economies?
Well, I think that has become more of an issue just because if you look over the last decade, the difference between people who are in the high end and people at the low end, that gap has increased. I think the long run solution, of course, is to make sure that people who are in low paying jobs, and again, some people are there temporarily. I was one of them. But if you're trying to make a career at a low paying job, for example, working at a fast food restaurant, probably that's not going to be a good career in terms of your financial situation. So we want to make sure that people have options for training and upgrading their skills. And I think that's long been a goal of North Carolina. And we've also seen, I think, more movement at the national level. The Biden administration's proposal for 2 years of paid community college, I think is something that they think will help with income inequality. Then you also worry, there's also some initiatives to make sure the social safety net is stronger for people who, for whether temporarily or maybe for are working in those low paying jobs. So we have a debate about obviously raising the minimum wage. The Biden administration has made some proposals on helping with childcare, as well as a variety of other things. So I think right now it seems to be a combination of private sector, public sector, private sector in terms of solutions, private sector solutions in terms of making sure that people have an ability to upskill themselves so they can move up the economic ladder, and then public sector initiatives to make sure that we have a strong social safety net.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Allen, I see your hands up.
Thank you, Matthew. Dr. Walden, you mentioned Franklin County and the possibilities of growth. You mentioned that we are part of the triangle. You never ever see Franklin County mentioned along with Orange or Wake or whatever. We are part officially of that area.
Yes,
we are sort of bipolar. We've got Jonesville and Franklinton and growing into Lewisburg with populations moving in. I'm in the historic district. There are lots of young people looking at these old houses. But then we have the Northeast where Dr. Jim Foster and groups are working very hard, as Matthew knows, to get broadband. I'm very interested in the Elon Musk proposal, well, the lower satellite. What's the timeline, you think, on that kind of technology enabling us to actually see some economic development and see even the ability of students in their homes to be able to get computer access?
Before I answer that question, you reminded me when you mentioned Warrenton, the first trip my wife and I made virtually out of the house after we were both vaccinated and the 2 brain span was to Warrenton. My wife is she's a retired school teacher. She's an artist. One of the things she loves to do every year is get bluebird houses, and paint them. She doesn't sell them. We got many of them in our yard, and she gives them to friends and neighbors, etc. And her supplier of birdhouses in Raleigh stopped doing it. And so she inquired, and she was told, go to Warrenton. There's a group there, I think it's a nonprofit, who makes birdhouses. And she contacted them. They said, come up, and we did one Saturday. I forget the street they're on, but they have thousands of birdhouses. And we stuffed our vehicle with birdhouses. Then we had a nice meal in downtown Warrenton. So that was our first trip away out of the house, was to Warrenton. Elon Musk, as I said, the Elon Musk's timeline, the last timeline I heard, is to have some prototypes ready to go. That is some test satellites ready to go by the end of the year. In terms of finance, I think what I've seen is that it would cost $100, one-time fee of $100 for a house to get the equipment in the house to receive the signal. And then all I've heard in terms of a monthly fee is it would be comparable to the monthly fees you have from other existing providers. Now, of course, one issue here is there are a lot of income challenged households who can't, even if internet was available, they can't afford it. So I think that's something we need to think about in the long run. But I think, as I've thought about high-speed internet, I remember stories one of my grandmothers told me. I'm from southwestern Ohio, and my grandparents, actually on both sides, were farmers. And I can remember sitting with one of my grandmothers before she passed, and I'd love to listen to her stories. And one of the stories that really stuck with me was the day the lights were turned on in her farm, which was in the 1920s, late 20s, I think. And what a massive change that made. And I think we're now at that stage with high-speed internet where we know that it's a necessity now. Our lives are tied to the internet in so many ways: education, business, entertainment, et cetera. So I think it's just a matter of time before the monies are allocated at the federal level. And I think in fact, one of the things that I noticed, there was a meeting, was it yesterday, with the congressional leadership and the president debating the president's infrastructure plan. And of course, Republicans want a smaller version of that, Democrats want a larger. But it seemed that both sides agreed that high-speed internet should be viewed now as part of traditional infrastructure. So I think it's coming.
Thank you.
On the high-speed internet, you asked how much the General Assembly has put together. The bill that was filed was about $1 billion in expansion for broadband, which I think, like you said, is going to be one of the biggest contributors to economic development, especially in rural areas. Also, on the technology side of it, you've got the SpaceX program, you've got open broadband, you've got CloudWise. There's a lot of new technology that's coming out there very, very quickly. That's going to get access faster than with your traditional, wire in the ground. I have heard reports that in the northern part of the county, and then even like you said, in Warren County, those areas up there are already using the it's not called SpaceX. What's it called?
Starlink.
Starlink. Thank you, Starlink. So
I think I called it SpaceLink. Starlink.
SpaceX. It sounds like something from the future, like we would have been talking about in the 80s or 90s. But anyway, it's so the technology is growing very, very rapidly, which excites me because it gives a lot more options quicker than we would have had even 5 years ago. So, and
that's one of the challenges right now. In fact, I just ordered a new book. That's one of my problems, ordering so many books. And then Robert, I think, and I have that problem where to put them. But I just ordered a new book yesterday or the day before that the author's thesis is that we're just scratching the surface in terms of the cloud and how it's going to change our economy. And this book supposedly will tell us how it's going to change. And that's one of the problems right now. I think we are in a situation of almost, I'd say, very similar to where we were 100 years ago, maybe the roaring 20s. We're looking at potentially the roaring 2020s based on all these innovations now coming to fruition. Just like in the roaring 1920s, where you had the automobile, you had electricity, you had air flight, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very, very hard for someone like me, who's not a technical person, to try to figure out what is this going to do to our economy. And the only answer I can give you is I think it's going to change our economy a lot. So I think that one of the challenges is looking at the economy today and how we recruit businesses and what kind of businesses might want to come to Franklin County. That could all change in the span of maybe a decade.
All right, so I could let Dr. Walden take up our whole morning because he's such full of knowledge, and it's so exciting to hear him talk. And I really do appreciate you being with us. I mean, it's a joy. You do a great job presenting, and I think everybody loves all the information that you provide us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Invite me back. I appreciate it. Thank you all for what you do.
Yep, you can hop off or you can hang out with us, either one. But I'm going to turn to Richie. Richie, it's 9:30. I like to get us to finish on time, and I like to give the towns and the county the opportunity to give a little feedback. So if you can be brief on your comments, that would be great.
We're going to be very brief. Andy, if I could ask you to do a screen share of the project report, and then we'll go into the unemployment numbers and the other data. And our project report will show pretty much exactly what Dr. Walden was just talking about, that North Carolina certainly is rebounding in terms of investment. And people are looking here for positioning of businesses. We are seeing one shift that I just want to highlight, which you'll notice the number of requests for buildings and the number of requests for sites. Those two are usually not that close. But what has happened is we do have such a low inventory on buildings, and we have people who do want to invest and come to North Carolina. They are now considering the sites, the greenfield sites, more than they have been previously. And of course, you're hearing the big announcements now, and a lot of those big announcements had been on pause during COVID-19. The announcements you're hearing, some of them taken years to get there, but we're delighted that they're moving forward, and we are seeing accelerated interest in this area. So Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Dr. Walden covered most everything I would cover. So the only thing that we would have unique is taking a look at our permit activity. We do see some trend analysis coming in line from what we see from previous years. And there's going to be a ramp up here in the next couple months, the July, August, September in the building on the commercial sector. So it's almost like there's a mild pause for a little bit as people get their capital together. And then we're anxiously awaiting enhanced commercial permitting later on this summer, provided there's enough materials to do such. And so a lot of externalities there. Outside of that, this is all will be available via email, so we can send it to anybody who's so inclined and wants to see it. That's all I have. Thanks, Richie.
All
How do
right.
you do, Matthew?
Great job. I love it. All right. So now we're going to turn it over to municipal and the county reports. I'm just going to go down my screen. Who I see first? All right, Kim, you're first on my screen. You want to jump in?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Walden, for that report. Always encouraging news. It sounds like coming along for North Carolina, and excited to know that Franklin County is in the mix for those positive things. Coming up for the county on Monday night, we'll have a county commissioner meeting, and at that meeting, I will be presenting the recommended fiscal year 22 budget. So we also will be returning to in-person meetings for the county commissioner meeting, and that will be in the courthouse annex. So I could talk about a lot of other things, but I think they've all been touched on in various ways already. So that's the most pertinent thing on my mind. And I think everyone's looking forward to hearing the recommended budget. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kim. All right, let's see. Keep on going. All right. John, you want to jump in for Lewisburg? You're on mute, brother. There you go.
I'll be very brief. We have a lot going on, but nothing we can really talk about right now. So we're looking forward to getting a lot of this stuff going and stuff that we can talk about here in a few months. So a lot of great things going on, and looking forward to play some golf this afternoon. So see y'all out there.
All right. I don't see, Richie, correct me, but I don't see anybody from Franklinton or Bond or Youngsville on here. Do you?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. So everybody, the days are getting longer. We're getting more sunshine. The sun's coming up earlier and setting later. This is my time of year. So I'm looking forward to seeing everybody and going to meetings face to face. So hopefully we won't do too many Zoom calls, although it has been convenient at times, that's for sure. So I want to thank everybody for their time this morning, and thank Dr. Walden for coming in this morning. And I'll be very, very good with anybody's time. If there's anybody that has anybody else they want to share, jump in right now. I'll pause for a second. I don't see anybody jumping in. Charles, you're on here. Do you want to say anything?
me open up my camera here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Walden, for those words this morning. Yeah, as you said, Matt, the sun's coming up earlier and setting later. So in the agricultural world, this is the time of year. A lot of things are happening, a lot of moving and shaking going on now. We'll let you know that from the agricultural standpoint, markets do look better this year. I'm sure Dr. Walden has seen that as well. So let's hope that is positive side for agriculture, and hopefully commodity prices will continue to increase and stay crops stay profitable for our agricultural communities. But thank you, Matthew, for recognizing me.
Absolutely. All right, anybody else? Last chance. Go once, twice, 3 times. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I really appreciate it. Everybody's very, very busy, and blocking out an hour on a Thursday morning takes a lot, and I appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing everybody soon. Have a good day.